At 1:30 hours on June 6, 1944, Private First Class Robert Wright sat in the C-47 transport aircraft 1,200 feet above Normandy, watching tracers arc through the darkness toward his plane. 24 years old, medic, 101st Airborne Division, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. He had enlisted in March 1942 from a farm outside Canton, Ohio. 2 years of training, jump school at Fort Benning, advanced medical training at Camp Tonkoa. This was his first combat jump. Beside him sat Private Kenneth Moore, 22, medic from Montgomery, Alabama. They had packed their aid bags together 6 hours earlier. Morphine syrettes, sulfa powder, plasma bottles, bandages, tourniquets. 80 pounds of medical equipment strapped to each man in addition to their parachutes and weapons. The anti-aircraft fire intensified. German 88mm flak guns firing from positions around Sainte-Mère-Église. The C-47 lurched left. The pilot was taking evasive action, but the formation had already broken apart. Wright could see other aircraft through the open door, some trailing smoke, some turning away from the drop zone. The red light above the door stayed red, not time yet. Then the plane shuddered. A flak burst hit the right wing. Metal fragments tore through the fuselage. The green light flashed on. The jumpmaster screamed, "Go!" Wright stood, shuffled to the door, jumped into darkness. His chute opened. He counted seconds, looked down, saw water. Not fields. Water reflecting moonlight. He hit flooded farmland 3 feet deep, went under with 80 pounds of equipment pulling him down. His boots hit mud. He thrashed upward, broke surface, gasped air. Unclipped his chute before it dragged him under again. Stood in chest-deep water in darkness, with German machine gun fire echoing from multiple directions. Wright found Moore 200 yards east, waist-deep in the same flooded field. They counted their equipment. Wright had lost his rifle in the water, but kept his aid bag. Moore still had his carbine. No other paratroopers visible. Gunfire came from the north, from the south, from the west. They had no idea which direction led to friendly positions. Moore pulled out his map, tried to read it by moonlight. They were 4 miles southwest of their designated drop zone, near a village called Angoville au Plain. Population 150. Not their objective. Not their battalion's sector. They needed to move. They found the wounded paratrooper in a drainage ditch at 0220 hours. Left leg shattered below the knee, bone fragments visible through torn flesh. Flak wound from the jump. The man was conscious, trying not to scream. Wright checked the wound. Femoral artery intact, but the tibia was destroyed. The man could not walk. German voices carried across the field, maybe 100 yards away. Wright and Moore could carry their equipment or carry the wounded man, not both. Moore saw the church steeple first, a black shape against the sky 400 yards to the east. Stone construction, medieval, the kind of building that could stop bullets. Wright made the decision without discussion. They would set up an aid station. Moore slung his carbine, grabbed the wounded man's shoulders. Wright took his legs. They moved toward the steeple, boots squelching through mud, the paratrooper biting down on a leather strap to keep from crying out. Dawn was coming. Light bleeding into the eastern sky. They could hear tank engines now, German armor moving through the village. They reached the church at 0545 hours as the first artillery barrage hit Angoville 200 yards north. Wright pushed open the heavy wooden door. Villagers huddled inside, stared at them. Wright looked at Moore, then at the rows of wooden pews. They had no idea this church would hold 80 wounded men before the week ended. At 0800 hours, German artillery hit the village center. The 105mm shells walked across Angoville in a pattern, one explosion every 8 seconds. The church windows shattered. Glass rained down onto the stone floor. Wright was treating the paratrooper's shattered leg when the barrage started. He kept working. Moore cleared the villagers into the back rooms, away from the windows. They had set up their aid station in the nave. The church pews would serve as operating tables. Wright inventoried their supplies: 12 morphine syrettes, 6 bottles of plasma, 30 bandage packs, 2 bottles of sulfa powder, enough medical equipment for maybe 20 casualties if they were careful. They already had 3 wounded paratroopers who had found the church during the night. At 08:45 hours, a French woman carried her husband through the door. Shrapnel wound to the abdomen. Wright laid him on a pew, cut away his shirt, packed the wound with sulfa. Moore started plasma. At 09:20 hours, 2 more paratroopers arrived, both wounded by machine gun fire during a firefight 300 yards away. At 10:15 hours, a German soldier stumbled through the door. The German was 19 years old, stomach wound, bleeding heavily. He collapsed onto the stone floor. Wright stared at him. Moore said one word: Geneva. The Geneva Convention required medics to treat all wounded regardless of uniform. Wright knelt beside the German soldier, examined the wound. Without surgery, the boy would die in an hour. At 10:30 hours, 8 German soldiers entered the church. MP-40 submachine guns. The sergeant pointed his weapon at Wright, then at Moore. He barked something in German. Wright held up his hands, showed his Red Cross armband, pointed to the German soldier on the pew. The sergeant walked over, looked at his wounded man being treated by an American medic. 30 seconds of silence. The sergeant lowered his weapon. He spoke in broken English. You stay. You treat wounded. You do not leave. The Germans walked out. By 1800 hours on June 6th, Wright and Moore had been awake for 28 hours straight. The church held 80 wounded men now. Every pew was full. Men lay on the stone floor between the aisles. American soldiers on one pew, German soldiers on the next, French civilians on the altar steps. The smell was overwhelming. Blood, gangrene, unwashed bodies, the sweet, sick odor of infected wounds. 12 candles provided the only light after sunset. The groaning never stopped. Some men cried. Others lay silent, staring at the vaulted ceiling. At 2200 hours, American artillery began counter-battery fire. The shells passed overhead with a freight train sound, each one making the church shake. Impacts hit 200 yards away. Plaster fell from the ceiling in white chunks. A German soldier started screaming, not from pain, but from shell shock. Wright had saved 1 morphine syrette. He used it now, injected the sedative into the German's arm. The screaming stopped. At midnight, Wright took inventory. No morphine left, no plasma. Enough sulfa powder for maybe 3 more wounds. The bandages were gone. They had torn up the altar cloths, boiled them in the church kitchen, reused them on new casualties. 6 feet of surgical thread remained. New wounded kept arriving. A German patrol brought 3 men at 0100 hours. An American squad brought 2 at 0230 hours. The patrols passed each other in the church doorway, neither side speaking. At 0315 hours, an American paratrooper died on a pew near the altar. Wright had kept him alive for 6 hours, but without plasma, the blood loss was too much. The German soldier on the next pew watched the American die. The German spoke English. You tried. Wright did not answer. He moved to the next patient, a French boy with shrapnel in his chest. At 0400 hours, gunfire erupted 100 yards from the church. The Americans were attacking again. The gunfire at 0400 hours came from multiple directions. Americans advancing from the west, Germans holding positions in the village center. Tracers cut through the darkness. A machine gun opened up 50 yards from the church. Bullets hit the stone walls, ricocheted off with high-pitched whines. One round came through a broken window, struck the wall 2 feet from Moore's head while he was stitching a shrapnel wound. Moore did not flinch. He kept stitching. At 600 hours, an American lieutenant entered the church. He stopped in the doorway, stared at the wounded. 23 German soldiers lying on pews, 19 Americans. 6 French civilians, all being treated by 2 American medics. The lieutenant's rifle came up halfway, then lowered. What the hell is this? Wright looked up from the German corporal, whose arm he was bandaging. Aid station, Geneva Convention. The lieutenant studied Wright's face, studied the blood-soaked pews, studied the German soldiers watching him. Carry on. He left. The Americans controlled Angoville now, but Wright knew it would not last. The village had changed hands 4 times in 18 hours. At 0800 hours, a supply drop landed 400 yards south. Moore volunteered to retrieve it. He ran across open ground, while a German sniper fired from a tree line 300 yards away. Bullets kicked up dirt 5 yards to Moore's left, then 3 yards to his right. The sniper was adjusting. Moore reached the supply canister, grabbed it, ran back. A round hit the ground 1 yard behind him. He dove through the church door with morphine, plasma, and bandages. Wright was already treating new arrivals. The German counterattack at 1000 hours brought fresh casualties. At 1300 hours, the Americans pushed the Germans back. At 1500 hours, the Germans counterattacked again. The church remained neutral ground. Both armies respected it now. Both sides brought their wounded. By 1400 hours, 120 men filled the church. Every pew occupied. Men lying in the narrow aisles between pews, blood on the stone floors, dark and slick. Wright collapsed against the wall. 60 hours without sleep. His vision blurred. His hands shook. Moore propped him up, poured water into his mouth. Wright lost consciousness for 20 minutes. When he woke, he immediately returned to the German soldier with the chest wound. No discussion, just work. At 1600 hours, a German medic entered the church. His unit had retreated, but he stayed behind. He looked at Wright, at Moore, at the 120 wounded men. I help. 3 medics now. The German had supplies from his own medical kit, morphine from German stocks, fresh bandages. They worked side by side without speaking. American on one pew, German on the next, French civilian on the third. The war continued outside. Inside, 3 medics moved between the wounded, treating whoever needed treatment next. On June 8th, battalion medics arrived and took over the church. Wright and Moore evacuated the critical cases to a field hospital 2 miles behind the lines. They had been inside the church for 72 hours. Neither man could remember sleeping. They collapsed in a tent and slept 14 hours straight without moving. The final count was recorded in the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment after-action report. 80 American soldiers treated, 60 German soldiers treated, 12 French civilians, 13 died. Wright and Moore could not save them. No supplies, no blood, wounds too severe. The survival rate was 91%. The church pews were stained dark brown with dried blood. The villagers scrubbed them for 3 days. The stains would not come out. On June 10th, Wright and Moore rejoined their battalion. No ceremony. No recognition. They were medics. The war continued. They treated wounded through Normandy, through Holland, through Bastogne in December when the Germans surrounded the 101st Airborne. Neither man mentioned Angoville. When other soldiers asked what happened during the first 3 days, Wright said they had been separated from the unit. That was all. The war ended May 8, 1945. Wright returned to Ohio, took over his family's farm. Moore went back to Alabama, worked construction. They never contacted each other after discharge. Wright married in 1947. Had 3 children. Never told them about the church. Moore married in 1949. Had 2 daughters. Never told them either. In 1964, the villagers of Angoville placed a memorial plaque inside the church. It named Wright and Moore. Neither American knew about the ceremony. Neither attended. The plaque read, "2 American medics treated wounded of all sides here, June 6th to 9th, 1944. The church was restored after the war. New windows, new plaster, fresh paint. But 2 pews were left blood-stained. The villagers voted to preserve them as a memorial. Tourists visit now. They sit where wounded. Soldiers bled 70 years ago. In 2004, a researcher found Wright in Canton, Ohio. He was 84 years old, diabetic, using a wheelchair. The researcher asked about Angoville. Wright stared out the window for 30 seconds. We were medics. That's what medics do. He refused to answer more questions. Moore had died in 1998. He never gave an interview about the church. After Moore's death, his daughter found a letter he had written in 1997, but never sent. One paragraph mentioned Angoville. We saved enemy soldiers while our boys died. Some people might call that treason. I call it being a medic. You don't choose who lives and who dies based on uniforms. You choose based on who you can save. That's all there is to it. Wright died in 2013. He was buried with military honors in Ohio. Neither man received the Medal of Honor. They received Bronze Stars in 1944, upgraded to Silver Stars in 2006. But in Angoville, the blood-stained pews remain. The church still stands, and almost no one knows their names.